You are listening to Wicked Psychotherapists, a podcast where two psychotherapists show you that taking care of and learning about mental health doesn't have to be wicked hot.
Hey guys, it's Tanya.
Hi, this is Erin, and welcome to Wicked Psychotherapists.
Yes, welcome guys. And thank you if you are returning. You know that we talk about various topics here in mental health. We don't, it's very light topics, nothing too heavy. But yeah, if you're new here, welcome. So today we're going to be talking about codependency, which is another kind of buzzword I feel like on TikTok. It's been, I don't have the TikTok.
I was just going to say, Tanya, you're so hip now. I didn't realize that you had.
I don't. I just see it through like Instagram. You know how they put up.
Yeah, that's how I get mine.
Videos. That's the only way I see it. So I guess I kind of do, but like it's not authentically me searching on TikTok. So I don't want to give anyone the impression I am hip. But I think that codependency is something that is not well defined for some people. I do find that clients come and they're like, am I codependent? Is this, they get a little confused. So I think we thought we'd just have a show about that.
Yeah.
So codependency is like more of a psychological term that we use. It's not a disorder, right? It's more of a dynamic, more something that somebody might have to work with within their personality, within their traits. And it can definitely affect intimate relationships. It can also affect friendships. It can affect child and parents, like child-parent relationships too. It can be pretty much any relationship, which I think is kind of one of the first things that maybe we should talk about is that this is not, I think when some people hear codependent, they only think of it as being in an intimate relationship when it really can span into any two people, three people, anything, right? Where there is someone who feels that they need to take on someone else's feelings or needs more so than their own, which sounds kind of strange maybe to some people who don't understand that. Let's talk about like some of the factors that maybe would evolve in someone to have them develop into, having a codependency either trait, or there is a DSM diagnosis of dependent personality disorder, which is somewhat kind of similar to codependency, but it would have to be really prominent in their personality profile. So what do you think is something that makes or would predispose someone to becoming codependent or having codependent relationships?
When I originally think of the word codependency, or when I think of it, I often think of a lot of times you side by side with family members who have somebody who is in substance abuse. Or, like that is always a buzzword with like adult children of alcoholics or people who are in Al-Anon or Alateen or anything like that. You always hear the codependency relationship where oftentimes when there's somebody who's struggling with something, where the family members may either try to everything's okay. I'm there with them. You do take on that everything about that person is yours now. How they feel, how they act, if they're happy, if they're sad, if they're having a good day, you're having a good day. If they're having a bad day, you're having a bad day. And you kind of lose yourself. And so when I do think of that word, oftentimes I think of how that feels, how that may, feels, because that is like, I know I've shared, when I was younger, my parents liked to drink a little bit, so we went to Alateen and stuff like that. And I remember that was always a conversation. That was always something that was mentioned, like what codependency is and how to recognize it and how to separate yourself from your loved one who is drinking or an addict and why we do that. And a lot of it is the trauma bond too. Like you're like, oh, they're hurting, so I'm going to hurt, or they're happy, I'm happy. And it is very much walking on eggshells too when you have somebody like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a really good point that I think codependency really became part of the psychological vernacular when, can be pulling out an SAT.
I know. I like that.
Look at that. I have not used that word maybe ever, but it's nice. But I think it really did come to light with, substance abuse. That was really kind of a phenomenon that it was starting to be recognized that partners and family members were really affected in this other way. And it's so funny and it's funny, I mean, just strange, not really funny, but when you were mentioning that the Al-Anon books and all that stuff, I do remember my mom did have some books about codependency because my dad was an alcoholic. And I think I just remember always associating it with alcoholism and like, okay, that this person takes on too much because, I could visually see like my father can't like wake up. So my mom has to go and make sure he's okay, that he won't, I don't know, fall over or whatever, like almost like she has to take on his emotions and his role as like, dad, and then also be a mom and then also be a person. And, it was just a lot. And I definitely would see that. I also think it's interesting when I got older, I started to realize it's not just that, because I think I really defined it only by that. Like if you're in a relationship or if, are in a family with that, you might have some of those traits. But I think I really got a visual when I was younger. It was just like, like a married couple or like, partners that were together if one had substance abuse issues. Like that was a very, like, I think that was very much focused on for a while, probably back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of enmeshment too. And I think that because when you're talking to, I just remember that book, I'm okay, you're okay. That was on our coffee table. And I'm sure that I've never read it, but I just remember it. I mean, I skimmed through it I still remember what the cover looked like and everything, but I know that had some stuff to do with codependency and, which is interesting too, because that's probably opposite now what we, it's like, who cares if they're okay? You should, you should be okay whether they're not doing well or whether they're doing well. So and that is something to, when we have clients who have codependency issues who are say they're struggling with codependency in their friendships or their relationships, it is trying to teach them to separate themselves from the other person, not physically, but just emotionally. Have your own interest, be able to experience different emotions, happy or sad, whether they are, and not always having to take care of them or, like using an example of if they're drunk or not able to wake up, their natural consequence would be that they get written up or something else happens. But a lot of times people who are in a codependent relationship, whether it's with substances or not, you do tend to lose yourself, and it can be very drastic or it can be subtle.
And that really makes sense that somebody would want to jump in there, especially like, financially, if your partner, say like just in that instance, would get written up and possibly lose their job and that loss of income, that it's like, well, that's hard for me not to, it kind of becomes into not just separating themselves emotionally, but also saying like financially, we might need to survive for that. So I might need to cover for some of those things. And that's why it can be kind of tricky. I also think that you can grow up in this type of household and you can kind of see this as a model, right? Like that can be the origins of possibly somebody thinking like, okay, my relationships are very much, I only care about other people's feelings. Like you're modeled after that. I also think there's other ways it can be modeled in, dysfunctional families, which is pretty much like all like, right? So every family has a mode of
some
dysfunction.
Sort of dysfunction. Yeah.
But I think if say like your emotional needs are neglected, say you have emotionally distant caregivers, personality disorders where your needs have to be put last just to be able to survive, I think those things can definitely start to shape you to feel like my needs don't matter. My only need is as a caregiver. And I do want to point something out, which is I think is interesting, but I don't know if you've ever gotten this, but I've gotten clients who are themselves in our field and they have been attracted to this field or other caregiving fields like, nursing, healthcare, all of those, sorry, I can't think of any right now. Like, you're
just nursing healthcare, nursing healthcare. Like, well, even animal care.
Yeah, like animal care, like people that feel like, okay, I'm going to and not to say that this is how you have to do the job, but if some people do have that pattern through their work, that would be a place that they would probably go to. Yeah, they obviously are caring, but that they may be expressing that dysfunction through their work, right? Like I've had some clients that I have met. Sometimes I feel like I struggled with that when I probably first started therapy as well. And I really had to separate that. I had great therapy and great supervision. So I was, always, I was very open and honest about that, but it was really tough if you like grow up and you're modeled to kind of feel like, I was like the youngest, the fifth in just a very dysfunctional family. And I think emotions were kind of like a luxury. They weren't something that was, it was, being able to just have food and being able to not, have police come over and stuff like that. Those were not daily things, but they were frequent. And so emotions were very much like, I got the message, and I don't know, very much so. I think probably the most out of all of my siblings to say, go internal and just care about other people. Just do that. That's how you get by, because then they'll be nice to you. They'll care about you, even though it wasn't true. And I think that's another measure of, how people may interact, and then they may find a career based on that, because I definitely think mine was somewhat guided towards that, which is not a bad thing, right? If you can work that out and say, I can separate that. Like if I were still enmeshing that, I think that would be an issue. But I've met therapists who have felt really bad because they're like, I feel like I shouldn't be this way. Like, why? But it makes a lot of sense that you would be attracted to a career like, like this, or, carrying fields where you can absolutely act that out, because maybe you feel like you have no like self-worth. You weren't given much to feel like you have like self-worth, and just the needs of someone because of substance abuse, because of personality disorders, narcissism, complete family dysfunction, neglect, whatever. You just were like, okay, these things that I'm having and feeling are wrong and bad. Let me just make sure everyone else is okay, because when I do that, I might get some interaction from people.
Right.
I might get some positive responses. And I think that some people are really, I think that it's kind of interesting that can lead to that. And it can be a really great thing. You really can, kind of recognize that and then start guiding other people to realize that.
Well, it is interesting though that people maybe who have experienced codependency or seen it in their family unit choose it for their career path. Like, so they decide to go into the helping fields, whatever that might be, because then they're able to navigate it in a healthier manner, maybe. So they understand, or they could even recognize it in other people. Okay, maybe you're in this unhealthy relationship. You're not putting yourself first, or even hobbies or other interests too. So how do you find yourself? And being a therapist could be a very great thing to be if you've experienced this in the past and you've worked through it, and now you're able to recognize it in yourself, and you can help recognize it in other people as well.
Yeah. I agree. It definitely can be a strength. And it can be with other, nursing, police officers, things like that, where people are, serving and maybe they see a situation and they kind of recognize the dynamics, but I think we can like address it on the ground, because this person or persons are coming to us for therapy, right? And to recognize those dynamics. And I had quite a few clients when I pointed this out to them, and I recommended, like Melody Beattie is a big author
Codependent
who wrote
No
about
More.
Codependent No More, the language of letting go kind of thing. Yeah. Like that. It's like, it's a whole different world for them, because they're like, oh my God, the pattern, it's not the things that are going on and how I'm acting. It's the pattern of these things and how they're playing out.
Right.
And it really shifts their entire internal paradigm. And it really is life altering.
Yeah. Well, and also that book, I've had quite a few clients read that, the Codependent No More. It's very opening. It really makes them feel seen and heard, because it's like, oh, this makes sense. This is what I've done, or this is why I've done this, or I'm not alone in this. So it's very interesting. I think there's a companion workbook too that goes with it.
Yeah, there probably is. Yeah.
But I have had a lot of clients who are reading it and we'll talk about it. They're like, okay, well, I don't really want to have all my sessions about codependency, but I'm just really excited about what I'm experiencing while reading this book and what I'm learning too. Yeah. So it's a talking point.
Yeah, for sure. And it definitely is. I think a thing that it can really shift your life, like how you make friends, the partners you attract, the people you allow or don't allow in your life, because a big part of codependency, I think, is learning your boundaries, learning the things that you want in your life, learning the things that are acceptable or not acceptable in your life, and that you actually have power over that and how to be able to do it. Because I think, I think people maybe that are outside of this just see this as a weakness. Like I grew up with this idea. I don't know if it came from my household or just maybe society, like people talking about it in general, that codependent, like, oh, if you're codependent, you're weak, like you're this, you're that. But there's so much trauma behind it. There's so much thing, like I didn't want to admit it about my own patterns because I felt like that's weak, like I'm not weak, I don't want to do that. But I had to kind of come to terms with saying, I know that I have put other people's needs ahead of mine constantly and just deleted myself over and over again because I don't know how else to interact with people.
Yeah. I've experienced that as well, where I'm constantly trying to remind myself, hey, this is what you worked for. This is, like you are important. Don't go back to that child or that teen who was suffering, who had those learned patterns of behavior, because that really did navigate my friendships throughout school and throughout a lot of my adulthood too. And even how I interacted at work when I worked in brick and mortar jobs, where it was very interesting too, like where I would sometimes navigate towards maybe, I don't want to say abusive relationships at work, but it was just kind of like, all right,
Those
probably
patterns,
not the health.
like the
Not very
toxic
healthy,
patterns.
not the healthiest choices all the
Me
time.
too. Yep. I totally understand that. Yep. Yeah. No, I really do get that. And I think the fact that we do understand that is something that, like you said, it really can help us recognize this with other people where they may not be understanding, like, why is this relationship, never working out? Like, what's wrong with me? And I do this, I do that. But maybe there's not enough of you in there. Or maybe there's also another thing in there. There's some like narcissistic kind of dynamics going on where, in narcissism, and I'm being very general here because there's different types of narcissism. So it's just for brevity's sake, but I think people who have narcissistic traits or the disorder itself tend to want people around them that can be more of a voice box towards them. It can be like extensions of them. And they don't come out and they don't advertise for that. It's just the way they behave because everything revolves around them. It's not, narcissism isn't necessarily checking yourself in the mirror every single day and being like, oh, like, I mean, it can be, but I'm saying like,
right.
And be like, oh, I need to, this is not just about looks, which is, I know we talked about that in misperceptions a while ago, but, I think that they can attract someone who is like, oh, you have all these big needs. I can meet them and maybe you will see me. And they're like, you can meet my needs. And there's like a moth to a flame kind of, and I definitely had those experiences in friendships, family relationships, all of the above. And I definitely see that as like a pattern with my clients too. Like they will, not understand why all of a sudden they feel like nobody sees me. How come I do all these things for people and I'm completely invisible?
Yeah.
And it's really hard when you get to
it's hard
that
for them to notice, wait a minute, I've been doing everything for the other people in my life or everything, to make them shine or to make everything correct for them. And I'm forgetting myself or I'm forgetting my own needs or who I am or forgetting what my voice sounds like.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely like a deletion. And it's not, for people that are not understanding this or haven't experienced this, and it's totally understandable if you just haven't experienced it. I'm just saying, like, to imagine it, I think it involves understanding that you do not have that internal check where I think, people that are not, that don't have this trait, they may just automatically check and see, am I good? Am I good? All my needs, and it's subconscious. That's not there for them because for them to feel settled and safe, it's the person who they feel like, oh my gosh, they're the ones that they somehow determine that.
Yeah.
And that's usually like a partner or a friend or something, when somebody
because because all of their self-esteem and their self-worth is tied into this particular person. And that's also what happens when somebody is codependent or there is a codependent relationship.
Yeah. They can certainly they look at, another person as a definition of themselves. Sometimes if somebody is codependent in a relationship, it usually takes the other person having a dynamic that feeds into that, right? Or that is, like you said, needs that, right? Like requires that. And so that's what keeps it going in a cycle. And because I think a lot of people we were talking about those toxic, like high school couples that kind of break up and come back together, break up and come back together. Or I don't know, adult relationships.
You see it a lot in anything. High school or college or adult, where that's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Or they'll put those stupid statuses all the time. Broke up, came back. It's like,
yeah.
like,
or
why
like
don't
a
you
whole
just break up for
explanation.
good? Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, that it's almost like on the outside, it may look like, okay, you guys are not good for each other, but there's some dynamic that it feeds both of their needs, and it
Mhm.
really is in this deep way that informs their safety, informs their well-being, their sense of self, even in narcissism, because, they're deep down inside, they're very insecure.
Yeah.
And so they need to kind of say like, oh, as long as this person continues to feed me in this way and justify me, I'm good.
Yeah.
Right. And this person says, as long as they're good, I'm good,
Mhm.
kind of that dynamic. So it can
Yeah.
get really confusing because it can look, and it's very frustrating to people on the outside because they may not understand that dynamic. They may not see
Yeah.
what's going on, or they just, may not really understand it.
And also, I just wanted to say something. Not every relationship is a codependent and a narcissist, or a codependent and an addict. It could be a codependent and a codependent.
Yeah.
Like they
that's
both
true.
could be
Yep.
very codependent on each other. That's really hard to make any forward movement with that. But that does happen too. There's so much enmeshment with that, but that does happen. That is a relationship dynamic.
For sure. I think that would probably need a very skilled couples therapist to be able to kind of, disenmesh, whatever that's called, disconnect and understand. And then like both
Yeah.
people to individually understand. And then
Yeah. To
sometimes,
recognize
and
it.
usually that'll be like, they may not come back together. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that they, like to, I've had some couples like that, and, they are too scared to be like, nope, I'm not letting this person go. And so they just need to keep the dynamic going.
Yeah. Or it's really scary to try to find yourself, because what if I find myself and then they leave me?
Good point.
And that's also a fear too, because what if both of them have abandonment issues, or their attachment style is, grounded in that, and they found this person that they're coupled with, or friendship coupled with, or whatever it is. And then it's just fear-based of like, what happens if we grow? Or you see this a lot in like the high school relationships, or, someone's going to college. I'm going to sabotage them so they don't go to college, or I'm going to try to figure out how I can go to the same one, or get a job nearby, or like
Give up my dreams to go be next to them.
Yeah. And you do see that a lot. And it's like, how do you help them or navigate that before that big event changes course?
Yeah. And I do have to say, in that, my experience, and this is just my experience, where, there is someone younger, maybe just less experienced in relationships, if they have this feeling like, I can give up everything for this person, I'm doing this, what am I doing wrong because I'm doing everything right? And you try to tell them like, hey, that actually isn't healthy. They tend to really, like they're going to push against you. You really have to work for it for them to understand that, because this has informed their whole worldview, their whole lives, and so it's also, like you said, it's scary to change it. And it's also scary to internally to be like, I may have a different worldview, right?
Yeah.
Like inside. And that's a lot. It's a lot of
Yeah.
it. So I think that's where we provide that good support and information to say, hey, this is not easy. This is not something that's short term. This is something that's long term. It's going to require a lot of bumps, ebbs and flows, and a lot of things where it's not going to necessarily feel the best, but to know, to continue to reorient them to say, this is the goal, this is where you're at, and these are the things that we maybe need to work on. And of course, I'm saying if this is a client that continues to come, sometimes people just drop out because they don't want to, they're not ready, and they may not want to do that. I've definitely had a couple of those where it was like, I've realized they were like, it was getting too much and they couldn't,
and that happens a lot with any topic with therapy, like that's usually, as therapists, we go, okay, well, therapy is going to get harder when once, like it'll be, sometimes you feel like it's easy, then it gets really hard, then it gets difficult. And then you might not want to see us again because it's really difficult, because we're talking about situations or topics that might be scary. And, confronting somebody or talking about their codependency or relationship or friendships or interactions with family members, that might be the first time they're hearing about it. And it might be really scary to change themselves or change the dynamics of the people around them and their worldview. And that could be, change is really scary. And that could be like very scary for somebody like that. And so there could be a big dropout rate with therapy for some people.
For sure. Yeah. It's really true. I mean, yeah, like you said, with any topic, but especially with this, where it's so funny as you were talking about, how scary it is to change your worldview. I was thinking of like the witness protection program. It's almost like you have to go and be like under a differerent identity. You can't necessarily
Yeah.
be around the same people. And it's not that drastic, of course. That's
Right.
our job, is to make the transition and to say, hey, you got to,
Yeah.
keep on with this, keep on, it's definitely more therapeutic, and
Yeah.
we try to, that's our
Yeah.
goal, but it is almost like having to reorient your identity, and that is, it's a
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because that's just like with, going back to how I mentioned addicts and alcoholics, like a lot of times, like the tenets of AA or when people leave rehab too, is like, all right, you got to find a new group of people you're going to hang out with, new group friends. But a lot of times they don't really talk about why. They just say, okay,
right.
because you're going to go in the same habits, not saying you might get enmeshed in a codependency something again. And they don't really
Yeah.
say that, but that's what happens a lot too. It's like, okay, well, we all have the same wants and needs, that group or whatever. So that's one of the reasons too, not only because you're going to probably want to do the same things you're doing that might not be healthy, but because the same people are still doing the same things and still have the same behaviors and same way of thinking.
Yeah, and even the tenet of like not being in a relationship for a while, or a relationship in the same group kind of, or somebody that's in recovery as well, is definitely a thing. Because
Mhm.
like you said, it's like you really want to be focused on yourself. These things that you weren't ever really able to do internally, you have to sit with it, and you
Yeah.
have to, it's uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable, but I always tell people, like, it's going to feel not good. I can't
Mhm.
guarantee that this is going to feel good, but are you going to like the results and feel a lot
Yeah.
more like who you are internally and externally? Yes, if you
Yeah.
continue to do this.
Yeah, like you see it like on a bumper sticker or something. But the self-care isn't selfish, but it really, but it really, it feels it. It feels like taking care of yourself or going to therapy, especially if you have codependency with somebody else. It's like, oh my gosh, this is so selfish. I'm being so mean and so selfish that I'm taking this hour for myself each week, or that then I'm writing in my journal, or I'm doing exercise, or I'm trying to find a hobby, or I'm doing whatever else it is that's not connected with this person or not helping this person, or that's really selfish, but you're actually really helping yourself and
Yeah.
showing up.
Yeah. Developing those things, connecting with yourself to say, oh, this feels relaxing. This feels good. Like, just connecting with your emotions is something you probably don't do too well. Like, you're not really used to that, because ideally, people that are children who become adults, which they will, sorry, children, I don't know why I said that. Children who grow up in families that are healthy to a degree. Like, I know we all kind of have like dysfunctions, right? But
Mhm.
are healthy, are developing these things through play, developing these things through healthy feedback, that parents are saying like, oh, you look at that, you did that. Oh, you must be a poet. Oh, you must be this. You must be a writer. Oh, look at this, like kind of giving them feedback and giving them that self-esteem, and then
Mhm.
supporting that, and then being able to engage with others with that and carry on in social skills. That's what these people were usually not really filled with. You know what I mean? They weren't given that connection in their self-esteem and their self-worth. So, I'm sorry, I don't mean to say these people in a crass way. I just mean with people that have
Yeah.
this, and have these difficulties. But it really is something, I think, that, it can be tough on the outside for people to understand this. And, I really, like I said, it really, a lot of people will come and they will say things like what I had thought about myself, like, I must be weak. I must be, what the hell's wrong with me that this
Mhm.
happened? And I try to point out, we'll go back to their childhood, and kind of see what happened, or if there was like relationships that were really like pivotal, monumental kind of milestone events, and see if some of those things, maybe contributed to that, because we can kind of usually
Mhm.
identify it.
Yeah.
Unless, the person has like a memory block or something like that. That's something else. But
Yeah.
yeah. So it's really, I think, an interesting concept, because I think nowadays, at least from what I've seen on the TikTok, it seems like people,
Nana.
people do, I think, are starting to see, oh, this does come from
Mhm.
something, I know we've kind of in the past said don't get your information from TikTok, and we're still not advocating that at all. But I'm just saying, I feel like it's more of a people recognizing that it's not just people being like weak and just like just a rug for somebody to lay down on somebody, and there's something just totally wrong with that person.
Yeah.
There's patterns, there's things that it develops from, and instances.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times people, when they think of that somebody, oh, they're so codependent or something, they go back to like, what you picture in like movies or the old shows with like, the stereotypical housewife or mother not really doing anything, just like taking care of everybody without thinking of her own needs.
Yeah.
But it's a little deeper, it's a little different than that. And it can expand, not just, we said, not just with relationships, it can be how you, with your family, with your coworkers, with your friends.
Yeah. And especially if you haven't recognized these things, or if you're just not aware of these things, it will continue to affect you in all, if not most of your relationships, unless it's you somehow interpreted it to feel like it can only be expressed.
Yeah.
I don't know, in one form, but I don't usually see that. I don't know. Do you see if it's only like,
I mean,
usually it affects most relationships.
And I do want to say something else. Like, it is okay to have a relationship where you're connected with the person, whether friendship, family, work, whatever, and you want to do things with them and you share hobbies and you share interests. That's okay. It's just the not being able to separate your own emotions for theirs, or, if anything bad's happening with them, you have to fix it, or bad, like whatever. It becomes
the dynamics of codependency. Yeah. That's what, that's what we're focusing on, is like, we're just saying, if that is something that comes into play, it's not, there's something that, if you're coming to a therapist, you probably have an issue, and that's usually something that can be.
But I didn't want, because I know
identified.
sometimes when people watch things on TikTok or anything, they're like, oh my God, that's me. But I don't want people to think like, oh wait, I'm having all that, but then forgetting that they might also be in a healthy relationship or have a good friendship where they actually can do their own things too. And they're okay with that, but they also connect in a different way.
Yeah. This is if, there's, we're recognizing if it's an unhealthy dynamic, if you're feeling like something's not good enough, or you feel like you're not good enough, and you just always feel upset and drained, and like nobody sees you. And, and even then that could be something else, but that's maybe something, a clue for us to dig in that direction.
Right.
So we really wanted to just talk about this and show the diversity, I guess, of codependency and kind of flesh it out a little bit more, because as always, we're kind of keeping our eye on some misconceptions sometimes, or things that maybe need to be expanded upon.
Right.
So we thought that this would be a good topic. So we hope you can also let us know if you have any questions, if you want to add anything, if you want to dispute something, if you want to, say, hey, no, I see it from another point of view. We are very open to that. It's not,
my codependent,
we're not the end all be all.
If you want to say my codependent relationship is working for me.
If that's the case, yeah. I mean, that one we might dispute a little bit, or
we're like,
for
all right,
you, but
prove it.
I mean, I don't know if it's working for you and you don't want therapy, and I mean, who are we to say, right?
We can't force you.
We're not trying to bring up problems for you. It's just that if this sounds familiar and you're looking for someone, to get help from, and it this is maybe taking over your life, then that's why we bring this up. But feel free to write us whatever. We're fine. And well, we hope that you learned something from this, or want to dispute something with us about this. Whichever way, it was just a good conversation for us to have. But let us know what you think. We always appreciate if you can leave us a review. That's very helpful. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Wicked Psychotherapists, on Facebook, The Wicked Psychotherapists. Subscribe and follow. And we appreciate it. Yeah. So, and don't forget, stay wicked
and keep your mind well. All right. Have a good week, and we'll hear from you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Take care.